So week 4, I think I want to start with sit reps since I can't get the ball rolling. But this week we're going to do book maps just to give you a taste of what's going to happen. So I think this is probably the very first class where everybody has sent in a manuscript, even if they hadn't finished reading it. There's always one, and sometimes two, who just can't get it in. But I think I'm getting pretty convincing on the if it's not on time, I'm not going to read it thing, because it's true. But early days where I got a lot of late ones and I had to be mean, but now I don't have to. Anyway, we don't have to talk about the manuscripts if you don't want to, but let's just go around and you can catch me up on how you're feeling, just to let you know, the manuscript comments from the one that was just kind of started to the one to most of them, which were complete, was anywhere from 7 to 259 comments, something like that. There was only one in the 200 and something range. There was a few under 100, like a couple, three, and one in the mid 100s. So there's a big range.
Individual comments.
The number of comments. Yeah. And that's when I commented on that manuscript. I think I probably left maybe 180, somewhere in that range. But that doesn't mean anything. Sometimes they were just like, I'm one of those people who does one word comments sometimes, because being a writer, you want to know if somebody's still paying attention. The most comments I've ever gotten on that manuscript in all the cohorts of this course is 480 something. And they were so detailed that the person probably didn't even need to write an editorial letter. This was somebody who worked in the TV industry, and their job was writing blurbs for shows on summaries on Netflix. So they just got a lot of stuff, and they sat at a desk somewhere, and if other people in the industry were overloaded, they'd drop off scripts for this person to read and comment on. So she was super duper fast, incredibly thorough, and knew a ton about story structure. So it was just she commented on every single thing she knew. And I would have been overwhelmed if I was the writer. It's not that long of a book, but it was a really good, interesting thing to see. I was kind of blown away. Okay, so let's go around. Kate, let's start with you since you're a morning individual.
Um, I wasn't sure. I didn't think we were supposed to. You mentioned that you were left with about 180. I'm assuming that means you had more than that and you whittled it down,
I didn't.
combined.
No, I mean, I only did it once because I wasn't going to use my what I did in this course. I was just going to do it so I knew the manuscript. So yeah, I didn't whittle it down. That was but there's no numerical aim really. I've had manuscripts that had 35 comments and they were excellent, Yeah. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. I was thinking that this was like the first pass, and that when we are working on our editorial letter and our brainstorming and book mapping and all that stuff, I would probably at that stage,
Yeah.
Edit my edits or edit my feedback.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it was a great, I thought it was a great experience of for me, especially to just force me to focus on just my responses and not, of course, I always have to have some suggestions because I just couldn't help it. But I tried to keep general, or, something that they maybe could use in other cases and other situations, or
Interesting. Yeah.
point of interest or something like that, but not make it too, this really needs a comma. I didn't do any of that, I don't think. But it was really interesting. I can't wait to get your feedback, because I debated how to approach it, and I decided that it would be most helpful for me to do what I do now,
Mm-hmm.
and get your feedback so that I know where my growth edges are and what I need to change, and going forward. So
Excellent. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah. And I look at, like I try to be fairly global in my feedback. So it'll be, well, you'll see it. And hopefully I'll get it to you before the next class, but sometimes I can't. So it'll be definitely before the week 5. No, next class is week 5. It'll be before the end of the course. I'll try and get it to you either before the next class or like the day after the next class. So you have something to look at when you're writing your editorial letter. Or, whatever. The comments don't have to relate too much to what's in your editorial letter, but there will be overlap, of course, I would imagine.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Carly.
I feel like I had kind of a hard time not being really direct. I mean, I had to go back through because I'm the kind of person like I'm used to editing for a really close friend who like I can literally write in her comments like I'm gonna start squirting you with the squirt bottle if you keep using the same structure over and over again. Um, so I'm just kind of I'm used to just being like super direct because I know she's not gonna be offended.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm like, I don't know. I may just have to market myself as somebody who is no nonsense and I'm not going to sugarcoat because going back through trying to like soften the edges of it a little bit. Especially because I had some very strong feelings about some of the things in the story.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was a little hard. But
I can't wait now. You got me. See, it's like you're a writer. You got me on the edge of my seat. I can't wait to see how you tore this writer a new one.
It was more of the tearing of a new one was more of literally me sitting on my couch saying out loud several times, like, where are you seeing this, Joe? Because I don't see this at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's so kind and gentlemanly. Where? When?
Frustrating.
Or
Yeah.
or my dog and my cat hearing a lot of the I said them out loud so that I didn't put them in the in the notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I kind of like softened them up, some of it up a little bit, and because I was
So,
trying to not be mean, because like this is not my genre at all. Like I
yeah.
genuinely don't enjoy reading romance
Yeah.
for this for the sole point of it's like romance with a little dash of plot, and I like it the other way around.
Right. Yeah.
So it was an experience. It was good though because my older sister is self publishes on Amazon and she's working on a contemporary romance and she's like, "Oh, you can read mine next," and I was like,
Oh, yeah.
"I will, but I'm not gonna like it."
You don't know that. I mean, yeah.
I've read the first like 30 pages of it, and I was dying. Uh, I'm just not like the contemporary modern stuff, like all the pop culture references and stuff. I'm like, it dates everything, and it just feels awkward for me to read it because I don't read that stuff. But
Yeah.
um, but it was a good experience, and I still will read hers because
But
I'm obligated because she's my sister. So
yeah.
and it wouldn't be fair because I have alpha read every single one of my brother's novels, and um, it helps that his stuff is more
Yeah.
my speed. But
Yeah.
got to be fair. If I do it for him, got to do it for her.
Oh, you're going to be so stuck. Involuntary niching in romance because your siblings write. This,
Well, yeah. Well, I
you write a
also
book about that. That's a situation you're in.
I also just I want to try and make that work because I know that she has a very large um, group of writers that she knows very well and who would
Yeah.
all jump at the chance to have a developmental editor. So I'm like, I can't just say no to this giant pool of potential clients. So
Yeah.
I'll see if I can make it work. it may not work, but I'm gonna try.
You got this. I mean, it'll work out however it ends up. It's all going to work out, right? This too shall pass, and then you'll figure out where you are and where you want to be. And if you're not where you want to be, you'll just make a plan to get there. I know it sounds too
Exactly.
easy, but that's the way I've found it. It's just you got to start somewhere. And my first gig in editing, paid gig that is, came through my brother. He doesn't write, but his friend wrote a memoir. Oh my God, sorry, I'm doing two computers at once. Okay. Cancel, cancel, cancel. All right then, Alan, how's your sit rep?
It was good. Is there a way to check the number of comments without having to manually count them?
Oh yeah. The only
I'm
way I
actually
know
really
that
curious.
is through Perfect It. Do you want to know how many you have?
I do, yeah.
Okay, I wrote them down, but then I panicked when my computer died. So let me see. Here it is. Gosh, I just
I'm
shoved it
guessing
in there.
50-ish.
Alan, 71.
Okay, that sounds
I
good.
hope you don't mind me
Some of them are
saying
some of
that.
them are really long. Because sometimes I wouldn't comment and then I'd do a big like macro comment at the end of a section.
Yeah, you guys are
But
in good shape. I just feel like it doesn't matter how many there are, actually. It's more about what they are. So we'll take a look.
yeah, yeah. So I like Carly. It's not my genre. That said, so the only really thing I had to gauge this against for doing, a straight edit, as opposed to the mountains of stuff I had done as a teacher,
Yeah.
um, is this last novel that I completed, and that was a 400-page, three-generation family saga in ancient China
Yeah.
by a non-native English speaker. So the pace that I worked at through that book was 6, 7 pages an hour. It was difficult. It was a challenge to just like there was a lot to keep straight and a lot of developmental issues. He was a first time writer. Anyway, blah blah blah. So this one, it was like whoa. I was doing this at like 20 pages an hour. I mean, I was
Okay.
way faster than I thought I would ever be. And it didn't feel like I was rushing through or missing things.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, I mean, one thing it was having me thinking is like, oh, maybe I should do some genre fiction if I can, just to fill in
Hmm.
the gaps and be able to churn out some work faster in
Yeah.
between some of the things that I might like a little better to have a little bit more meat on the bones.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's, again, I have a lot of questions about getting work when you're not saying like, I'm a mystery editor. That's what I do is mysteries. And then all the mystery
Yeah.
writers want to come to. So well, I'll figure that out. But I don't know. The process was okay. Again, it's not my genre. I don't mind it. I didn't mind doing it. I can get really quickly, when I was a teacher, I was, you know, teenagers like to write a lot of emo fantasy kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Or a lot of boys will like to write very techno sci-fi kind of stuff. And I don't like any of that. But
Yeah.
so I'm used to just kind of, I can get very quickly past like what the story is and just into like, is this working? Are these things working or not?
Perfect.
So it was a fine experience, I guess.
Yeah. Cool. Interesting. Olivia.
Audio now unmute.
Hello.
Ew.
Okay, so not to keep belaboring the point, but this is also not really my genre, but it was really great experience after I stopped freaking out because I was like, I have no clue what I'm doing. Oh my gosh. And but once I got out of my own way and I just started doing it, like Ellen just said, as long as the story was making sense, or like I felt like things were working, like I could put aside like my personal feelings about it because that gets in the way. You're like, oh, I don't really like this. It's like, okay, we've established that. Let's move on. Like, is the
Yeah.
story, is it gelling, is it not? And um yeah, that was really great experience. Also, I realized the chunking it into like 15-20 minute intervals really works for me
Yeah.
because that was about the length of my attention span.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I tried to do more than that. I was like, stop, you're not, this isn't for you. So I just had to cut it at 20 minutes per session, but that really worked. So yeah,
That's good.
it was great. So
Oh, that's so great to hear. Yeah, the what I found was when I first started, I could do about 30 minutes of that type of reading, but now I can do 90. So it just your attention span might grow as you get more practice, and you start realizing what your mind's doing while it's doing it. That was what I found, is I caught on a lot quicker when I wasn't paying attention anymore, and I would either refocus or stop, basically. Week 4, part deux, developmental editing for fiction. We're all up on the logistics. This slide is an overview of weeks 1 to 3, all text. Week 1, just the 3 lesson titles. The big picture, what to expect. The big picture as in who hires us, and what's publishing about, what to expect from the course, and the 3rd lesson, all about you, which was reading sensibility. What do you like? What do you know? The recap of week 2 lesson was lesson 2.1, meet the writer in the project. Then that monster lesson in the middle, the developmental edit unpacked, where I went through the 5 stages as I do them, understanding the novel as it is, being the first one, which is what we're still on. And then an introduction to active reading. And then the recap of last week's lessons is, the first one was, geez, I think I forgot to switch these around. I think I did craft first. No, maybe not. I can't remember. Anyway, we talked about, how not to kill the writer's spirit with the tone of your comments. And then we did a few little things on craft, scene dynamics, characterization, just basics, point of view. And then I gave us sort of a quick introduction to the book map, what it's for, what it's helpful for, and how long they take me to do. Okay, so now we're on week 4. Analysis as a diagnostic tool. That's what I called this week. And first, we're going to look at craft elements from outside the train. Then we're going to do a step-by-step through book mapping. And finally, the book map is only one thing. Making it is one thing, and then you analyze it. I swear I'm not touching my nose. So we're going to go through the questions for an analysis when you do a book map. And I'm actually going to, I have put them in the packet as well, because there's 16 to 20 questions that I ask myself after I finish a book map, depending on what strikes me as most interesting. So I tend to narrow it down. I don't ask every question in complete detail, but I do go to do this kind of process of analysis to help me figure out what I figured out. All right. So here we are, back to the 5 stages. This just shows stairs, and then it's got 5 bullet points. The first phase is understanding it as it is. We were starting to do that. Diagnosing issues, we're actually starting to do that a little bit. By the time you finish reading the novella, you will have an idea of some of its issues just from reading it, because if you're experienced readers. Then we've already considered context a little bit in terms of the writers, what the writer wants and so on, but and the publishing landscape for novellas, but we'll do that also more. Identifying solutions, we might have started doing that a little bit. That's step 4. Kate was saying that when you're doing marginal comments, she just sometimes would come up with a solution that made sense. And so that's totally normal to think of solutions as you're reading to little problems on the page. Definitely not, copy editing issues, but more like just things like, what color is this person's hair? That's, consider giving us a quick description, or letting us see this character in action so we can, see them from another perspective, or whatever. And then telling the writer is the 5th stage. We have not done that yet. This is a slide just showing the title of the week, which is Analysis as a Diagnostic Tool, as I mentioned, and it's got Sherlock Holmes as played by Basil Rathbone, and I don't know who played his sidekick, John Watson, and they're looking at something. I'm not sure what. Okay, here we go. Craft elements from outside the train. Slide of a train going through the countryside. We can see almost the whole train, but not quite. And this slide just has 4 bullet points on it. Dramatic structure is the first one. We can see that by doing a book map. Story engine. We kind of see that from both reading the manuscript and doing a book map. Reading the manuscript, you can feel when you get bored, basically. If the story engine isn't operating, you're losing interest, or sometimes it feels episodic, or you're forcing yourself to concentrate, which I don't do with published books anymore. I was a very conscientious reader till I became an editor. And then I was like, wait a minute, nobody's paying me to finish this book. It's still pretty rare for me not to finish a book because most published books are of a certain quality. So story engine is one of the things we will definitely, you can feel by reading, and you can kind of see it when you do a book map, because you will be reverse engineering the novel, seeing which scenes repeat information the reader already has, or don't change the status quo, don't move things forward, that kind of thing. Third bullet point on this slide is plot. We can see the plot most definitely by doing a book map, because it is really a list of scenes. And for me, plot is what happens in what order from whose point of view. So really, it's kind of like a scene list. And then the fourth and final bullet point on this is cause and effect. And we can see that by studying the book map and analyzing the book map. Can't necessarily see it when you first make it. And they're all interconnected, of course. Naturally. Yeah. It is hard to separate those things sometimes, but that's because that's how it is with fiction. It's always going to exist on more than one level, an issue or an asset. If its characterization is fantastic, it's always going to exist. You can't just say, oh, characterization is great, but everything else is awful. Character affects plot and vice versa. It affects scene dynamics, it affects everything. So it's kind of artificial to break them up like that, but it's a really great way to learn. And when I do talk to writers about particular things, because I kind of do like pull things apart in the editorial letter, I always am pretty careful to say, by the way, this is kind of an artificial construct, but it's going to help. Okay, this slide, dramatic structure in 3 acts. So it's got a diagram basically of what's been called the Freytag triangle. It's a long upward angle, blue line, and then it goes to a climax, and then there's a resolution, so it drops off. And it's split into 3 acts. There's dotted lines bisecting it. The middle act is longer than the first and last acts. When I'm writing, I try to remember the first 25%. I think of it as the first act. The middle 50%, I think of kind of as the second act. You can think of it as 5 acts, whatever works for you. And then the final climax and resolution, I think it was the last 25%. But I have edited and read novels where the climax happens at the 80-90% mark, and they can still work. So this is just kind of was invented in the 1850s, I think, 1800s, to explain dramatic structure for stage plays, because the novel was still a new form in the 1800s. So 3-act, 5-act drama. There's terminology on this slide. There's something, and a lot of it is from the movie industry. The setup, which in novels can be called the status quo. Then the inciting incident, which on this diagram happens around I would say probably the 10 to 15% mark. Somewhere in there. It doesn't. By the way, I don't necessarily ascribe to these notions of structure. I just it's good to know them, because some of the writers you work with will know them and they'll want to talk about them. So it's good to learn the terminology, even if you don't necessarily think that every novel has to follow this plan, as I don't. Then there's plot point one. It kind of changes, the characters go through a turning point. I call them doorway moments, which I learned from a writer named Jess Walter. And they're just, I like that term because they go through a one-way door. They can't go back to the way things used to be. And then there's this kind of rise where the midpoint is in the middle of this rise, and it's usually made up of increasing obstacles in almost any genre, where the character, even in literary fiction, where the character gets more and more kind of entangled in their situation or confused by it, or has to draw deeper and deeper on their own qualities to understand how to get out of the problem they're in. And this rises to the climax. Often there is another doorway moment, sometimes more than one, for sure. Sometimes there's more than one climax. A climax can be several scenes, can involve several characters, especially in multiple points of view or omniscience. There's often, climaxes are paced kind of from the midpoint on. Subplot climaxes will be in a different place from the main plot's climax. And then there's a little tail going down, the resolution. Basically, all the main plot complications get sort of resolved. We understand how the character has changed and grown. Yeah. I've read manuscripts. Well, we'll talk a bit more about structure. These kinds of diagrams are on the web in multitude. You can find them in books. They're not hard to find at all. I like this one because it's kind of cheeky. Like under crisis or climax, they have all is lost, beat the big boss, save the day. It just, whatever kind of book it is, that's kind of what happens. But we're going to look at a bunch of different books. Okay, so this slide will show 3 novel covers with different structures. The first novel is The Financial Lives of the Poets by the aforementioned Jess Walter, who's a very good writer. And it's got a roller coaster structure, and I know this because I read it, and I also know this because that's what Jess Walter said he was aiming for when I took a workshop that he led. The protagonist is a financial journalist with a balloon mortgage coming due. If any of you were around for the days of balloon mortgages before the economy exploded, and no way to avoid losing his house. Plus, he has a troubled marriage and 2 little kids. Almost immediately in this novel, like within about 5 pages, he plunges into a life of crime to save his house and marriage. And then things just keep going downhill really rapidly. So I drew this little squiggle of a roller coaster structure. That first tale, which it's too long. The downward slide starts very, very early in the novel. So the question driving that story isn't really, will he lose everything? But more, how fast will he lose everything? And how will he cope with it? I found it funny. Okay. The second novel is used to be taught in schools. It's called The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. A very old novel, and I only chose it because it's one of the novels that everybody probably has heard of that you can see that it has a road trip structure, except that the road is the Mississippi River. So in novels with a road trip structure, there's a bunch of things that kind of help stop it from being meandering or episodic. You have basically characters in a confined situation. In this case, it was a raft. Sometimes it's a car or a train or whatever. Don Quixote might be considered a road trip. It's also thought of as picaresque because the main character is larger than life, the protagonist. So in road trip stories, the structure is bounded by time and geography, basically. The road trip has a beginning, a middle, and an end because they make their destination. And then it's bounded by geography in that they're moving through a landscape which forms the story world. And there are people in this landscape that they interact with. So there's there's a story engine that isn't built on necessarily, status quo, blah, blah. It's not exactly the Freitag triangle. However, you can impose the triangle on any of these structures and, it might enrich it, might make it easier to write, might make it easier to edit. The third book, also an oldie, and I have to confess, I've never managed to make my way through this one, Moby Dick. And the structure is built around a quest and a confrontation. So it's a quest narrative, like the King Arthur stories, the Holy Grail. They're looking for something. A lot of fantasy are quest narratives. You might say the Da Vinci Code is a bit of a quest narrative, but it's also a mystery. And then when you get it, when you start really unpacking what different novels are in terms of their structure, you're veering into genre as well. You can't help it. It's all connected. Okay, we're going to look at more on the next slide. There's 4 more covers, book covers on this slide. One is Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. And I put it in a little box with Ian McEwan's novel On Chesil Beach. I think On Chesil Beach has won some prizes, and Mrs. Dalloway has been around forever. I would say they're both variations on the day in a life story. Mrs. Dalloway is about Mrs. Dalloway giving a party, but it moves back and forward in time and among different points of view. So it's kind of, although it's built around a particular day, it resonates all over the place. On Chesil Beach is a short novel about a wedding night. It also moves back and forward in time. This disastrous wedding night, basically what happened after and what caused it, but that's all told in intercut with the wedding night itself. This one, I don't know if anybody's read it, Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. 6 nested novellas. It's quite wacky. What hears it as a novel, because it is a novel, is that characters recur, descendants of characters recur, themes recur, language uses of language, musical pieces from one to the next recur. And this is a complicated novel. It's an interesting reading experience. It won't be for everyone, but I would say give it a try. Okay, here's one that probably nobody will have ever heard of. It's called The Loop by Dan Sanders, and it's 2 connected spirals. Just in my opinion. And so it's told from after death. This protagonist is walking through the woods, and it's a sort of loop that he's on with a bunch of other people, and it's a form of purgatory, I think. And once in a while, somebody will stumble, and they'll either get whisked up to heaven or dragged down to hell. So he's stumbling, he's sort of trudging along this loop in the woods, and he doesn't know what's going to happen to him. So that's one thread of the story. And then the other spiral is flashbacks to his life. His mom committed suicide when he was 9. His father was an alcoholic. He became an alcoholic himself, the protagonist, couldn't keep a job, had no friendships. His son was an alcoholic who died before he did. And then we actually get a description of the protagonist's own death. So you might think that's a strange way to tell a novel, but I thought it really worked. I was gripped. All right. This next slide has diagrams of things that some novelists would use to guide their manuscript structure. So you might as well get familiar with them, and I'll describe them. And Olivia, I'll try to get them to you in a way that you can see them, because they're hard to describe, but you've probably heard of the hero's journey. It's basically a circle, and it starts with, there's this kind of steps along the circle where the hero keeps meeting challenges. Recognition of need, help from strangers is number 2. Accepting the help is the inside work. So this particular diagram has the inside work, inner journey, and an outer journey. Outer journey, traveling from known to unknown. Inner journey, connecting to risk or committing to risk. Outer journey at the bottom of the circle, danger and reward. And inner journey, confronting fears to earn renewal. And then there's trip starts reversing for the character to go home, and they return home with a gift in the external journey and a sense of mastery and well-being in the internal journey. I don't ascribe personally to sticking with diagrams as a way of understanding books. I think it's okay for some people. It doesn't really work for me. I consider it more of an emotional, artistic experience to read a book. This next diagram is overlapping, well, it's parallel storylines. And so it's got 3 characters, A, B, and C, and each one has a line. And the lines start out straight from each character, and then they start squiggling into each other so that the storylines move forward together. And the nonlinear story just moves around back and forth in time. It might start in the past, or might start in the present and then jump into the past, but in a very, very deliberate way, not just the dreaded page 2 backstory dump, but an actual designed experience. Some novelists love nonlinear. I'm just thinking with published writers here, it's kind of their thing that they do. And you can really help a person with their manuscript who's trying nonlinear if you read a lot of nonlinear published novels. So if you do end up getting attracted to a certain type of book, or you could say your niche expertise is in say parallel storylines or nonlinear stories. It doesn't have to be a genre if you read a lot of that particular type of novel. This next diagram is called the Robleto, and I do not know its origin. It's got a bunch of spirals, and they're different colors, and one is called Introduction, and then the climax comes, and then the journey, and then the close. And there's a line of repetition. So honestly, I have no idea. I'll put in the Slack that there's websites that just take apart all of these structures. But the main point of this slide is just to show that the Freytag triangle is only the beginning. This last diagram is called the Kishotenketsu. My Japanese is terrible. It's got a flat line for the introduction. It's a little bit more like the Freytag triangle than any of the others. Then there's a sharp rise to the midpoint, and that part's called development. And then there's a twist, so that the line spirals back down and does a loop-de-loop. And if you ever read Japanese detective fiction, which I love, that twist is in every one, and it's not so much a twist in the detective story as in a twist in the reading experience, kind of. And then the conclusion is a flat line on the same level as the introduction, etc., etc., etc. I would say for when you're editing, it's a writer who will think about structure more. And they'll make most of their decisions around structure before you even get the manuscript. But knowing that there are options will help you serve the writer, and it will help. It will also help you avoid forcing them into a straitjacket that they've got no interest in wearing, because writers are just, they're individuals, and if they want to do a certain thing, it's not our job to say, well, that's not how Hollywood does it. I think you should, let's make it this way. I don't consider that my job. I want to make what they want to do work, and you can suggest pretty radical changes just even trying that. But the thing I like about the book map and how that relates to structure is it'll help you see what they're trying to do. They might not know what they're trying to do, but it'll help you see, and then you can see how it can be improved or tightened or made more cohesive. So I would say the point always with structure is to let the novel be your guide, and then figure out what they're doing by doing a book map if you can and you like them. If it's clear that they're going for the 3-act structure with the climax and all that stuff, then show them how to improve that if it's not working. And if they're doing something else, book map will help you have a conversation with them about what they're doing and whether it's working or not, because they will, once they see the book map, even if you just do one and then talk to them and don't ever show them the book map, they will understand that you have really taken apart their novel and that you are not just making assumptions about what you've seen from how it reads. Okay. Issues with structure. So this slide shows a woman sleeping with a book on her chest. Because because she's bored. And that is what I think tells me there are issues with the structure is they're often felt as pacing issues. It's just too slow, or sometimes it's too fast. You know, sometimes the status quo feels too long. You know, I don't always know if it's too long from the book map. I know from how I'm feeling when I read, and then I confirm my suspicions in doing the book map. And then I can say to the writer something like, why not move the events of scene 12 up to scene 4 and cut those scenes in between or conflate them? You know, like you can get quite a technical discussion going if you both have access to the book map. Or acts, complete acts or chapters might feel too long or too short. Sometimes the ending feels abrupt and not in a good way. Writers will sometimes just run out of steam. Every time I enter the 3-day novel contest, the ending is incredibly abrupt because I run out of time because you got to finish it in 3 days. So you'll feel it. There's no standard you can apply in terms of word count because every novel is different. The same goes for scenes. Many scenes, well, scenes are meant to move the story forward, reveal character. They're often driven by conflict or drama, internal or external, as we discussed last week. And the big difference between a scene and a situation is that, how dare you? I actually had my arms crossed when that bullet went. The scene, something changes at the end of the scene. Whereas a situation, let's say a kid goes in to wake up his mom and he can't wake her up. It's a situation if nothing changes. It's a scene if he freaks out, calls the ambulance, runs to his room. You know, it's just something actually has to change in the character's experience for it to be a scene versus just a description of a situation. So scenes are, you know, they have a point. If they didn't have a point, you would just make the narrative summary or skip over them completely. And if a bunch of scenes are doing the same thing, like let's say the character's traits are being revealed and they're always the same traits, they have 2 or 3 scenes with the character being rude to somebody, readers are smart. They will get it. One scene is plenty to show that kind of thing. So there's no forward progression, no deepening, then it's a sign that 1 or more of those scenes can go. Next bullet says too much backstory or flashback. Book maps are great for diagnosing that because those can also weigh down a book's design. The idea with flashbacks, backstory, is to give the reader just enough information to understand the story. But then, didn't we just look at the loop? It's all backstory. Well, the half that isn't trudging through purgatory is backstory, so there are no rules. I would say, generally, if a book works, it works. You can feel it as a reader. You don't feel like structure is a problem, it's probably not a problem. Another thing that can become apparent, I guess, partly through the reading experience and partly through looking at the structure through book map, is that you might feel that the novel would benefit from more clarity on the one hand or more complexity on the other hand. Often clarity comes at the sentence level. You know, at the beginnings of chapters or scenes, writers sometimes forget to orient the reader. Whose POV are we in? If there's more than one, where are we? You know, 3 days later, it's 3 words. It really helps sometimes when the reader has no idea what's going on, especially in scenes that start with dialogue. Complexity is a little more complicated. It's if there's not, let's say there's not enough plot threads. You know, there's only Destination Wedding is not a great example because how many subplots can you have in a novella? But I just worked on the novel I was talking about last week. I finished the developmental edit on Friday and suggested another subplot because although there were things going on, there was not enough going on for it to be a traditionally published novel, which was the writer's goal. And I don't mean plot events exactly going on. I mean just breadth and depth of the story world, the characters' journeys. There's you know, their transformation, just a bunch of levels. It needed more. It actually, there was 5 or 6 story threads, so one of them could be expanded into a subplot. And you know, the more you read, the more you get a sense for, just if you think about the books you're reading now, if you're reading a novel, you can pick out the subplots. A really good exercise is to see when they start and when they end, because they won't necessarily start and end at the same time as the main plot. So just really read like an editor, and it'll change how you look at books. And then you can turn it off. I'm able to turn it off when I read library books, because otherwise I'd drive myself insane. I'd have to get another hobby. And I don't really like watching TV that much. Okay. I would say, yeah, just to touch back on the complexity, it might have to do with the braiding of plot threads or points of view. You can see all that through the book map, because that's the level of detail you go down to. And I would say, as a professional reader, I consider my job first to be to feel what I'm feeling, especially with fiction. Understand what I'm understanding. You know, do I understand it? And then figure out where I want it to stop turning the page, and why. And of course, it'll happen multiple times during almost every read of a unpublished manuscript, because they're often rough. If you don't want to turn the page, then there's a reason, and so you can figure out what the reason is. And sometimes it's a you problem, but most of the time, the more you read, the less of a you problem it becomes. As Alan was saying, you know, you can look past whether this is your type of book and get to looking at, well, how can this work better, or is this working, or why isn't this working? So I would say, in my world, you know, the way I edit, it starts with my feelings as a reader with fiction, and but it doesn't stay there for very long. I jump immediately into analysis, and the book map is quite scientific in how it can help you diagnose what you think are the problems, and it can also help you see potential solutions when you apply the questions that I'm going to tell you about later. Oh my gosh, I think I spent a little bit too long on structure. Okay, it's a biggie though. This slide is all just text, and it says the story engine with, I think, 3 bullet points. So the first one is the sense of forward momentum. That's what I mean by story engine. And so even in a novel with a spiral structure like the loop, there's enough forward momentum in both the purgatory scenes and the life story scenes to keep the reader turning the page. Non-linear structures need momentum. They all do. Story engine can begin with a question, and often does. You can really see it in mysteries and thrillers. They get closer and closer to solving the whodunit. Big question posed in the middle. In a thriller, it's usually more like, can I stop the murder of the US president? And then there's a series of heightening stakes and puzzles and internal growth by the character that's required to meet the challenge, and so on. And it's tied in with character arc, even in commercial fiction. I would say they have to dig deep, even if they're a professional detective or something. They have to get over themselves in order to progress in a book. Series characters less so, but definitely one-offs. I would say there's that expectation in publishing now. And you can really see this story engine in romances. You know, if the ending has to be happily ever after or happily for now, and the plot's built around obstacles to love, that stuff's all quite external. Even if the obstacles are internal, like that, there's this one where this one particular trope in romance where they hate each other when they first meet, and then, you know, they get over it. Question in romance that keeping romance readers turning the page is, will they transcend their obstacles and get together? And I think one thing romance readers like about romance is that you always know the answer is yes. I personally don't always want to know, but you know, I read a lot of mysteries, and I do it because I know they're always going to get solved. It's like the same reason I watch Criminal Minds on TV. I just sometimes you don't want to think too hard. So, and the last point about story engine is it keeps the reader turning pages. And I would say, let's sum it up. we can think of it as the underlying ordering of plot and character growth that keeps the reader turning the page. And when it's faltering, you can diagnose it by looking at basically two main things. The character's arc, I would look at first, and then the plot. I'm including a bit of background info on Story Engine in the packet, but again, I would say the best possible training you can get to work as an editor and to understand fiction is to read a lot of fiction and analyze what's keeping you reading. Because whatever's keeping you reading is what kept the agent reading when they first said yes to the manuscript. You know, everybody is probably still reading because of the same reasons. People who love literary fiction, they read for the language, but they also read for character development. And finally, plot. This is an image of an open book with bullet points, and they are, plot, I would say, is built around character. Actually, let's back up a little. Do you want to write in the chat? What do you think is more important, plot or character? Or do you think some novels are plot driven and others are character driven? Whoops. Excuse me, I can't find the chat. Oh, there it is. Hold on. Anybody gonna guess? Ah, there we go. Danica, both. Haha. Danica, where are you? I don't have everybody on the screen. There you are. And yeah, cool. Okay. Any other weighing in as the genre? Yes, I would agree. Both. From Olivia, plot is important. Yes, totally, I agree. Without a quality character, the plot won't really matter. Kate, I think some are more one than the other, but they all need some of both. I concur. Okay. Oh, Alan, I always think character is most important for stuff you like to read. Even in a book that seems plot driven, the plot needs to emerge from character. I would agree with all of these. Absolutely. I'm gonna tell you about, so that Jess Walter, that Financial Lives of the Poets writer, in that workshop, he really clarified my thinking around plot because he asked this question: what if the plot of a story is that somebody is going to the store to buy some milk? Is that a good plot? And we were all like, no, it's kind of boring. And then he said, what if that somebody is 5 years old? And then we all went, yeah, okay. And because it's all about the person, it's all about the character. A 5-year-old has limitations and vulnerabilities that make them an interesting protagonist, you know. I mean, that's not much of a story yet, but at least with a 5-year-old, it's got a running start, you know. So I just thought that was a very good question. So I do believe that all good fiction is character based, and the plot is just there to show the character in action, you know, and it has to be interesting. But you can have a very cool, good character and then have a so-so plot and it'll still be a good read. So I'd say built around character. That's the first bullet point. Shows characters in action. The plot does. Moves the story. I've actually, there's a book where I think it's called The Mezzanine, Nicholas Baker. I'm just guessing at title and author, where it's just this person's lunch hour and there are people watching the whole time. That's the entire novel. So you can do it inside somebody's head. It's just harder. Raises questions that again make the reader want to turn the page. And I don't mean page turner as in, you know, plot commercial fiction. I just mean they don't want to put the book down and walk away. They would rather read it. They'd rather finish it. Some books I have to read very slowly because I'm into the language and I don't want to gobble it up like I would one of the murder mysteries I read for relaxation. But I still want to turn the page. Woo! Okay, that was a short one. All right. This next, this I thought plot was last. Cause and effect is last on this swing through the craft. Does the scene or incident, so this slide shows dominoes. You know how dominoes, the first one falls and they all fall? The book map can help show you how scenes are connected with each other like dominoes. And there's a writer named Lisa Cron. She wrote a book called Wired for Story, which you might have read, or you might, if you're a writer. And it's really all about cause and effect. She suggests a few tests. They're in your week 4 packet, so don't feel you have to take notes or memorize them, but they're on these bullet points. Does the scene or incident impart a crucial piece of information without which some future scene won't make sense? Does it have a clear cause the reader can see, even if the real reason it happened will be revealed later? So I'll get back into that in a minute. Does it provide insight into why the characters acted as they did? So motivations. Does it raise the reader's expectation of specific imminent action? I would say it doesn't have to be imminent personally, but Lisa Cron has imminent. And for me, the finest and biggest question is, if I cut this scene, would anything that happens afterward change or need to be rewritten? And if the answer is no, the scene can go. So to go back to does this scene have a clear cause the reader can see, even if the real reason it happened will be revealed later? So I'm going to give you an example. I read this novel set in communist era China, where the protagonist, a girl of about 13, is in charge of her 2 little siblings, 4 and 5 years old maybe, and they're all starving. There was no food in the whole city. She goes out. She plans to go out searching for food, but before she does, there's this brief little scene with her siblings where, you see a little bit description of the room. They ask a couple questions, and then she says, "I'm going to lock you in. I don't want you to leave." And she locks the door because she doesn't want them to get into trouble. Then she leaves, and the main, what feels like the main action is what happens to her after she leaves the house. She's looking for food. She can't find any. She meets an older woman putting up propaganda posters, and the woman gives her some of the paste, the flour paste they used to stick the posters to the walls, so she has something to eat, but she can't bring it home. Anyway, she's heading back to her side of the city, and she sees this plume of smoke rising from her area. And right away, I felt that the smoke was coming from her apartment building. And I knew that she had locked her little brother and sister inside to keep them safe. And so I read that whole scene of her traveling back to her area. She was noticing the smoke, but she wasn't having the thoughts I was having. As a reader, the hair was rising on my arms because I was feeling so much dread. I was really anxious and riveted to know if they were alive or dead. And one thing I didn't tell you about the scene where she locks them in is in the little sweep of the room, just visual sweep. It touches on the brazier that most families in that era had in their room, this little tiny coal thing to cook food on. And so there was a source of fire in the room. It wasn't just, that was probably contributing to my feeling of dread. So the scene where she locks the door and says, "You guys stay here," didn't feel like anything. It felt like nothing to me, the big scene was her going to get food. But it was causally very important because it changed the entire trajectory of the story and of the girl's life, her character arc. So that's an illustration. How do you help a writer fix an issue with cause and effect? You just point it out, usually. I sometimes list the scenes that have no causal relationship to other scenes and just repeat character development we've already seen. It's pretty rare that there'll be a lot of those, but I will always say, specifically which scenes could be cut or rewritten to include information. Sometimes I call it leaving breadcrumbs to include information that will matter later, because there's opportunities to use existing scenes and establish, say, a character's wish to run a gym, a boxing gym. And then later, when she buys a boxing gym, we know that she wanted to do that. It seems elementary when you're reading, when you know about cause and effect, to not use earlier scenes to build up to this character's main want. But many novice writers actually forget about, planting breadcrumbs. So So the solution is always specific to the novel, but it's usually just kind of strengthening motivation and arc. Any questions? That is the end of our, what is it we're doing again? The craft portion of tonight's class. Pardon me, I blinked. I'm honestly not blanking out here. It's just, if there are no questions, we will take ourselves a break. Okay. I would say, where's my timepiece? It's 4:39 here, so I'll see you back here at 4:44. All right, I think we'll get cracking. Lesson 2, week 4, book mapping, step by step. Beep, 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 beep. Step 1, know your motivation for book mapping. This slide just shows bullet points plus a guy with a telescope. Money, you can charge more for edits that include a book map. That wouldn't be your only motivation, but it's a factor maybe. Confidence. Doing a book map gives me confidence in my own assessment of the manuscript's strengths and weaknesses. So my motivation comes from basically from my own ego. I like to know what I'm talking about to the largest degree possible, which is not very large, but a book map will make it larger than if you hadn't done a book map. Authority, competitive edge is the third bullet, and those are sort of related because not every editor offers book maps. Not everyone knows how to do one, or doesn't like doing them, or doesn't feel they're worth the time and effort. So to have it as something you offer will set you apart from other editors. Let's say you get a sample, let's say a writer gets a sample edit from you and 2 other editors, and you are the only one who offers book maps. They might go with you even if they don't want a book map this time around, or they can't afford one, because the fact that you know how to do one gives you a bit more authority. Client base is the 4th bullet point, and that refers to the fact that in some genres, book maps are handier than in others. Mysteries, I would say definitely, because you can track the plot lines, the unfolding of each mystery. Sometimes there's more than one, and certain genres just have very, strict structural kind of guidelines, and so meeting those structural points is important to meeting reader expectations, because readers expect certain things from certain genres. So if you plan to work in a genre where reader expectations are pretty firm, then learning how to do a book map to analyze the books you work on is not a bad idea. Oops. 5th, oops, for goodness sakes. Oh, okay. Well, never mind. I had a 5th bullet point in my mind on this slide, which is curiosity. I just really, really like doing them because they satisfy my curiosity. They will show you elements of any novel that you would be hard-pressed to discover by reading it, even if you did the most active reading in the world. Before I knew how to do book maps, I would read manuscripts 2 to 3 times for every single edit. And yeah, it's time-consuming, and you still don't get as clear of a picture. Okay, but I do them for all kinds of manuscripts, nonfiction, life writing, memoir, all that stuff. Okay. So the next step, once you decide you have the motivation to do one outside of this course, that is getting good at them. And that requires blocking your time. Getting good at them, actually, it doesn't require blocking your time, but it's very helpful because it makes your life easier. It reduces procrastination and anxiety, and book maps are not super easy to do. They're not really that much fun. So my obsession is based on experience that I like not to be panicking, and I do not want to be a flaky editor. There are a lot of people in this field who miss deadlines without thinking twice about it, or who never set deadlines and or turnaround times, and that's fine. Their clients don't mind that. That's great. But I'm getting those people's clients sometimes because writers do not want to deal with flakiness when their novel is at stake. They just don't want to. And they shouldn't have to, in my opinion. So, my obsession with timing. It's just, this slide shows a calendar and bullet points say allow several hours. Set a deadline for doing the book map. I know how long they take me. So let's say I have 2 weeks left on my turnaround time and I finished the first read and all the multiple comments, and maybe I've sorted my comments, although I usually wait and do that after the book map, because sometimes I add comments when I'm doing a book map. I add comments to the manuscript. But I know I want to finish my book map at least 4 working days before the edits due, because it takes me a day to write an editorial letter for a full-size novel, usually. And then I want it to rest for a day, and then I want to look at everything and let it cohere. So I'm not working on just that thing for those 4 days before, but I want to finish the book map. Last week, the edit I returned, I finished the book map at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I delivered the edit at 6:30 that night. So I did not follow my own best practices. It was, it was a decent edit. It wasn't my best work. Start as soon as possible. Once you know you're going to do one, don't, as soon as you've done the read through. I sometimes, you use their manuscript and you go through it. I'll tell you exactly how, but I sometimes use the manuscript they delivered to me, because the book map always reflects, so the one without my comments, because the book map always reflects the story the way it is when you get it. It doesn't reflect what you're suggesting they do. Whoops. Okay. All right. I would say, when I say allow several hours, 4 maybe? I might have said 6 in the packet, whatever you think. You could do for half an hour and see how far in you get. If you're chapter 2 after half an hour and there's 9 chapters and they're approximately, of a length, which I don't think they are actually, but if you take half an hour to do 2 chapters, then 9 chapters would take you X plus Y equals that. I have no idea. Okay. This you'll remember, this slide you will have seen last week. It's those bubbles with my thinking on Destination Wedding. So one of them says Joanne, Tom, all that stuff. I did another one, a different bubble arrangement, and I won't even go through it in detail because it's really not that much different, but what it shows is that my thinking has coalesced a little bit. I'm putting Joe and Tom at the top, and their family names are inside their bubbles. Lisa is another bubble, like a Venn diagram also. She overlaps both of them because she's the main reason they're there. And then the fact that Lisa and Tom are both, formally married, what a coincidence. What a coincidence. And then everybody, so I just moved all the little bubbles around from last week to make it kind of coalesce in my own mind. The client never sees this stuff that I do with drawings. Sometimes I don't do them at all. But the status quo B story, I think about everybody's status quo, everybody's B story, everybody's individual wants and obstacles. So this is just me thinking about the story. I do this before I start the book map. After I finish the first read, takes maybe 5 minutes. I don't agonize over it. I just do a brain dump, my initial thoughts. And so although this slide is populating with all the other stuff that was on the previous slide, like genre considerations, romance, were there obstacles to love? If it's women's fiction, does Joe transform? What are the main emotions? Is love even in there? Is love even in Destination Wedding? Questions. Okay. And this slide shows the image of a book map for Destination Wedding. And I will explain what it shows, and also I will send this out to you and you can fill in the rest, or you can change my text in this and use it and then fill in the rest when you do the book map for Destination Wedding. And I'll send it in Excel and in Word in case anybody here doesn't like using Excel. Or Olivia, can you use Excel or just Word? Okay, yeah, Word. Okay, so I already have it in Word, so I'll just do that. Send it out to everybody in both. And this is a spreadsheet with 9 columns. And the columns are headed. Chapter number is the first column, scene number, second column. I arbitrarily assign scenes. Well, it's not arbitrary. I say where I think the scene begins and ends, because not writers don't normally number their own scenes. I have the next 3 column headings are all about word count. I have the word count for the scene. I have the word count for the novel up to that point, and then I have the percentage point of the total word count. So by the end of scene 2, we're 5% into the total word count. This is a geeky thing I do. I don't know of any other editors who do this. I just like doing it. Probably everybody who's taken this course at least tries it. I don't know if it sticks. The next column is point of view. This novella has 2 points of view. In a novel with 1 point of view, wouldn't necessarily have a column for point of view because it doesn't change. I originally thought that location might matter for Destination Wedding because it's called Destination Wedding. So when I set up the book map, I put location as a column. It doesn't actually end up mattering that much. What happens is the tough one. That's a description in a few words of the entire scene. So I'll just describe scene 1, which I think takes maybe a page and a half. Joe leaves her wedding in Bar Harbor, broke and reluctant, stops for coffee, aggravated by exchange, considers jamming, that may be a Canadian term, considers not going, but goes. So this is a very abbreviated version of what happens in that scene. And you do that scene by scene by scene by scene, all the way through the entire novel. Is it boring? No. It can be tedious, I will say. And then that's what matters at the moment. I have sort of a catch-all column while I'm actually making the book map, and I put a note on that in your packet. I just call it notes, and I'll dump anything in there I feel is important as I unpack the novel. So it might be somebody's character development. It might be, you know, that the character's name changed. It could be very minor. It could be very important on a developmental level. All the columns are fluid. And this random notes column will turn into something before I deliver the book map. I just don't know at this point when I'm doing it. I don't know what that is going to be, what that something is going to be. I would say the column headings can change also depending on what type of manuscript you're analyzing, number of points of view, whether location really is important, how developed it is, and what the writer needs help with. So you could have columns that just focus on character growth, or you could have, if there's a lack of meaning in the story, you could have columns that focus on thematic underpinnings and elements, and yeah. Or if the characterization is fantastic but the plot is meandering, I would focus probably on the cause and effect chain, the chronology, just the plot elements, and put a column in there about, you know, how that's falling down. So that's the columns. Let's look at the rows here in this diagram. The first row after all the heading stuff is just the chapter number. And then there's scene numbers, 1, 2, 3. They're in the next column down, but yeah, the next column along, but they run down through to the end of the bottom of the book map. Most of my book maps are 9 to 15 pages, depending on the length of the novel and how many scenes it has. The one I just did was 13 pages. The novel was only 60,000 words, but it had 112 scenes or scene fragments. If there are other things in the novel, like emails, excerpts from newspaper articles, whatever, websites, I count those on their own row. Flashbacks, I count on their own row, even if they happen mid-scene. Because if there's an 1,800-word flashback in the middle of flanked by the beginning and end of a scene that's only 200 or 300 words each, the flashback is bigger than the scene, not just in word count, but in the reader's mind. So bits of narrative summary exist. I don't necessarily I don't have a row for those. I just kind of group them in one C to the next when I'm gauging word count. When you do it, you'll get a hang of it. You know, this sounds probably a little weird, but you'll figure doing it will actually help you do it. It will help you learn how to always do it. Okay. You can also track elements of world building, which can be important for fantasy. Young adults, sometimes there will be a magical object, or even just something like a cell phone, something pretty prosaic. And the world, you know, sometimes objects will deteriorate or become more important, or they'll change hands. And that might be something you want to track, especially if it is middle grade and there's a magical object, or puzzles, or even epigraphs that are important. So it's all kinds of stuff that you can track. Did I mention my client that I drove across town to give her my book map of her memoir? She had epigraphs and she had written the memoir over a 15-year period. So some of them repeated and some of them didn't align that well with the content of the chapter. Epigraph is when you quote somebody at the beginning of the chapter, just for those who aren't aware. So I had a whole column just for epigraphs, so she could see how I viewed them. You know, she could get an objective sense of whether they belonged where they were and see which ones were repeating. So that's the process. And you just do that. You put your cursor at the beginning of the very first word. I put it at the beginning of the C in chapter 1. If there's a table of contents, like there is often in middle grade fiction, some adult fiction, I put table of contents as a row item, and I just call it front matter. I don't assign a scene number, and I put the number of words in there. I don't make comments on what happens because it's just a table of contents. But then each chapter, I start with the first scene, skim read it, go to the book map, get on the what happens cell, type in as abbreviated a form as I can without losing anything important. And of course, sometimes you don't know what's important. Type in what happened. And then I do the word count as I go, because it can be a real pain in the behind to go back and try and remember where you thought scenes broke. It just creates an extra hour or two of work because I know because I had to do it last week because I wasn't on my game. So you do that from the beginning of the novel to the end. I will, aside from just making sure I track the number of words per scene, I save a lot of the math for the end. I don't necessarily need to know that I'm 50% of the way through, unless I feel like I'm gonna, you know, have a stroke because it's so tedious, in which case I do stop and do some math just for a little break for my brain. And yeah, you just keep going. Don't put anything into the book map that isn't on the page in the manuscript. It can be tempting sometimes to add feelings or, you know, make it sound better. Just put exactly what is in that scene. And, you know, with you can say how people are frustrated. Joe kicks the what and does the thing, you know, but so it's one adjective. It's not a whole explanation of their feelings, because you've already kind of got a feeling thing going on in the comments theoretically, and if you don't, you'll find another way to do that. This is all just practice at the moment, and it does take a certain amount of practice to write down what happened in a scene in 3 or 4 sentences. It does, especially if it's a long scene. If it's a 2,000 word scene, sometimes it's 10 sentences, but it's still not the whole scene. So you're abbreviating it, you're skim reading, you're kind of trying to encapsulate it. I worked, just to go back to not putting anything that didn't happen in there. I worked with a writer who started doing book maps before he sent me the manuscript, which I really appreciated. But his book maps were incorrect in that they didn't reflect what was on the page. He had stuff in there that wasn't in the novel, and he had stuff in the novel that he didn't put in the book map because it was boring. So he was sort of editing his work, you know, as he wrote the book map. But so you're not doing that, you know. Writers could do that. I think what he was doing was adding things that he had intended to be in the scene that he didn't realize weren't in the scene. So you're not making any assumptions and you're not drawing any conclusions. You're not really thinking that much. You're just absorbing what's there and translating it into a shorter, more telescope version of itself. You're not changing the order. You're reflecting the manuscript exactly the way it is. And then keep doing it until you're done. This is a slide of somebody climbing a mountain with a pickaxe, because it can feel like that. If you're doing a 140,000 word novel that has a lot of scenes and scene fragments, and it can just feel like work, and more than reading does for me. But I love it because of what it reveals. Most writers will not know how many scenes they have in their novel. You know, it's not that they count them, or you won't know if they know because you haven't discussed it, but they will all know how many chapters they have. So when you finish your book map, just make sure you've got the right number of chapters. And sometimes, just an aside on marginal comments, if you use the version of the manuscript that has your comments in it to skim read, to do the book map, you'll be seeing your own comments sometimes, depending on what magnification you use on the screen. Or however you do it. So if you can see, I don't always use that version. I sometimes don't want to see my own comments. I just use the version they sent me. It was before I worked on it. But if you do use that version, you can pop in extra comments as they occur to you. Sometimes you will come across as more intelligent than you actually might be, because you've had twice at the manuscript and you've seen a new problem that you didn't see on the first read. And so when I deliver an edit in the editorial letter, I say the comments are what one reader is thinking when they read the novel. You will see contradictory thoughts, some silly questions. I left everything in so that you could read over my shoulder, you know, but my actual considered opinions are in this letter. So I just kind of say, if things don't make sense in the comments, don't sweat it. It's not that important. When it's done, this slide shows a woman standing at the top of the mountain, looking at the view. Oh, she's taking a picture of the view. But when it's done, feel good about it. I would say stop and celebrate your achievement. And then you can take some time later or the next day or however long your deadline is to clean it up, as in finish all the math, you know, adjust the columns, whether it's Word or Excel, so that the writer can read everything you've written. I tried and format it so it fits on one page, because I work with quite a lot of boomers and they like to print stuff out. So it can be quick. Okay, I also print. I print my draft book maps because the next part is the analysis, and I like to do that lying down on the couch. So you don't have to do it. You know, you can do it on screen. That is the introduction of how to do a book map. I know that walking through it this quickly will not actually make you feel like you know how to do one. Doing it will really make you feel like you know how to do one, and struggling with it will make you feel like you know if you want to do one, probably. But I would give it more than one chance. You know, if it's just not working for how your mind works or your tech or whatever, then it's not something you have to offer. It's not that common. They're getting more popular, but there's still tons and tons of editors who don't offer them at all. Okay, any questions about the how-to? All right. It seems straightforward-ish, maybe. We're on to the last lesson tonight. How are we doing for time? 5:08. This is good. This is the questions for analysis. I think this is the more interesting part. And the book map is incomplete until you've done the analysis, because asking yourself these questions will help you corral that that last column with just random notes into something meaningful that the writer can look at and actually see something important about their novel that's reflected in an excruciating amount of detail that only you and they will ever be interested in enough to read. But it's it'll open, it'll make it clear what you're saying or suggesting on a big point, usually structural, sometimes character arc. So I'll explain a little more. Points for analysis. These are the questions. Oh, wait, I have another slide. It shows a diagram of a train, floor plan, and I don't know what the side view is called in architectural drawings. Floor plan and side view. The old train metaphor. I can't get enough of those things. Okay, here's the possible points for analysis. There's 16 bullet points, and they're in your packet, and I'm going to read them too. So, and if anybody has taken Heidi Fiedler's course on book mapping for developmental editors, you will have seen a version of these. I learned how to book map from Heidi Fiedler. Okay, so the first is plot movement. Does each chapter or scene move the plot forward? You're just kind of looking at them. You're not thinking about it matters, doesn't matter. You're just taking a look. The next one is character development. Does each scene develop character in some way? It can be super minor. Emotional impact. Do scenes have an emotional impact or contribute to thematic underpinnings? We're going to talk about theme in week 5 next week. So we can just kind of leave that for now because it's sort of complicated. It's deep. Opposing goals is the next point. Does the antagonist's goal directly oppose the protagonist's goal? That only works for some genres, which is why these are general questions that you can look through and see if any jump out at you as important to this novel. In the case of Destination Wedding, this one doesn't really make a lot of sense because nobody has any goals, which could be a problem, actually. The subplots. Oh, and another thing is there might not be an antagonist. Or it could be the weather. It could be something quite trying to think of the word. Abstract. Okay. Subplots. Are any storylines or subplots introduced but not resolved? Not everything has to be tied with a bow in every novel, but if there's big ones that are just hanging there, that's good to know. Next one is plot holes. Are there any plot holes or just illogical jumps that don't work? Next one is backstory dumps. Do you see big swaths of backstory or flashback that could be condensed, move, or cut? So you'll see those on the book map if you've done a word count. Oh my gosh, there's 2,400 words of backstory in chapter 2. It doesn't all have to be cut. It can sometimes be condensed, moved. This is your chance to find those spots and go, yeah, I wonder what should happen here. Next bullet point is turning points. Where are they? That's those doorway moments. Where are the points where the character does something sort of irrevocable? Climaxes is the next one. There's often more than one. And where are they? You're just noticing. If the climax is at 60%, there's a bit of a problem because there's too much resolution after. And I know what it feels to read that because I've edited a book where the climax happened right after the midpoint. And it just didn't work, it for some reason the reading experience works better with the climax, more like in the last quarter. Next point is pacing. Are there sections that have pacing issues, whether they're too slow or too quick? Conflict. Are there scenes that completely lack conflict or goals? Repetition. That can come on many levels. Repetition of words and paragraphs, repetition of events. Even sometimes characters can be too similar to each other. So this is repetition of a character, the job. If you consider you have to pay $100 for each character in the book, are there ones you wouldn't pay for? Because they're doing exactly what this other character is doing. Cause and effect. Oh, and yeah, repetition. Do any sections repeat information the reader already has? That's the kiss of death for me as a reader. If the writer doesn't trust me to read it, to get it the first time, I don't want to read their book. Not at work, obviously. I just tell them that I already have that information. Cause and effect. Is there a strong cause and effect chain, or is it strong enough for the novel? Does it work? Chapter breaks. I will always look at chapter breaks. Do they make sense? I don't always suggest changing chapter breaks, but I'm interested in where people break their chapters. World building. I just look at how much world building, this often happens actually during the reading process, but if there are objects or anything I need to track or confusing things or shifts back and forth in world building, I will notice it in the book map. And if it's a big deal for whatever type of book they're writing, I might do a column on developments in the world building. Okay. This slide says it's creative, shows a brain lit up. The first bullet point says these questions in the previous 16 questions, they're not a checklist. It's more you just kind of think about which ones make you think. It's never a cookie cutter approach either. I've never felt that developmental editing of fiction could be done with a cookie cutter. It's just not that kind of job. I would say when you do skim over those points, when you work on destination wedding, book map, just go to whichever points spark thought or reveal insights, and then just randomly pick from those ones which column you kind of want to, what you want to title that column you're exploring those aspects through. Yeah, so it's really about thinking. By the time you've finished, I take my time when I read a book map in the hard copy lying on my couch. It takes me at least an hour to read 12 pages of a book map of a novel I've already read once and then skim read again, because I'm drawing arrows, I'm noodling around, and I'm just writing down my thoughts, and then they all start to come together. I almost need the book map to write the editorial letter at this point. I've become so dependent, but you could absolutely not do them and you'd still be fine. Okay, now I'm going to screen share, and Olivia, I'm going to I'll put these into Word and I'll send them to you on separately, because they won't make it's not that helpful to have them described. Okay, screen share 3 book maps. Pardon me. Sorry, I'm sighing. When I restarted my computer, I forgot to reopen Excel, but it's going pretty fast. Okay. Pardon my language. There it is. Wait, there it is. Okay, sure. So this is I call this one a story map. Wait, can you see it? Good. I'll make it bigger. I called it a story map because it was for a short story, I can't remember, 2,000 word short story. I'm gonna have to shrink y'all in order to see what I'm doing. So this story, you will see a book map in action because it's just a story. Scene 1, the word count, the percentage. So the first scene was 323 words. What happens just is 1 sentence. The setting is the racetrack, and then I have a column headed structure / character development, and in there I have status quo. The main character is a good driver, eager to learn more. So that's where he's at when he starts story. And my notes, my second column is called notes and suggestions. Too long for what it achieves, could trim back by 200 words, and I've done that in the manuscript of this particular story. So this short story map goes through the story scene by scene, says these first 2 scenes were narrative summary, which is not great to open a short story with, but it's not terrible either. It depends on the story. And then there are a few big scenes, and I'll always, in the structure character development column, which is only specific to this story, I have marked out the doorway moment, main character and friend get into rally school. And then I've said some problems in the notes column. There's no obstacles to the career, and made a suggestion. about what they could do about that. So some of this stuff will be in the editorial letter because it's short, it's a memo for short stories. And often I get them in collections. So I have a bunch of stuff and it's, you know, it talks about order of the collection and everything. But this kind of gives you an idea of what a 1-page story map looks like. And then I'm going to show you something a little more interesting, which is wait, you won't see it yet. Or my deep heavy sighs. Okay. This wait, I haven't shared it. Sorry. It's like watching paint dry. Share screen. It won't let me share until I get out of sharing and then I get back into sharing. Can you see it now? By any chance? Okay. So this is a book map for a 75,000 word mystery-ish, maybe 72,000 words. Oh, there it is, 77,000. And it is told from 12 first-person points of view, which I had never seen before. And actually, this writer is doing it again on his next novel in the series. And you can, it also doesn't have traditional chapters. It goes day by day through a 1-week period set in 1970 something San Francisco, 1973. And what I found interesting about this book map, well, the chapters are super long, but within each chapter, it moves around from one point of view to another. So the reading experience actually feels quite fast. It doesn't feel like you're waiting to get to the end of a chapter so you can go to bed. And the thing I did that I thought was fun for this writer was I mapped out how much of the word count each point of view had, which is easy to do if you use Excel. It's going to be more difficult in Word. You need a calculator. Might not be worth it, actually. But from this graph that I created, it shows each of the 12 characters and their points of view range from like 1% to 33%. And this was kind of a good check because there is a romance subplot, and these Gary and Mona are the two protagonists, main characters, and they're also having the romance. So it's a good check to see when you have multiple points of view to see just how much of each point of view, how much room, how much weight each point of view has in the story. So that's another one, and I'm going to show you a third one that is kind of, I did something weird with, and then we'll be almost done. I don't know if it was weird.
When you did the percentage for each point of view, is that based on the word count of their scenes or how many scenes they had?
Word count. Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Yeah, it's wait, have I shared this one? Am I sharing? Am I not sharing? It's so complicated. Okay. Being a bit of an idiot. Let's see. My gracious. Excuse me while I bumble through this entire. Here we go. Okay. Sharing the screen of a novel, historical fiction, 70,000 words, unusual in that it was from the point of view of a dog who lives to be over 100 years old. And I hadn't actually finished this book map. I just wanted to show it to you because there were I had this feeling of doom when I got to the end of chapter 2 of this novel, feeling like I did not want to read it. I had to really force myself to read this manuscript. And I think that the reason was I had to figure out why. And so I did this analysis of each chapter's kind of shape by breaking it down into scenes and then assigning each scene. This is how odd I am. You know, I don't feel like I'm that odd, but this is the kind of thing you can get into if you developmentally edit and you like reverse engineering stuff. So I I kind of subjectively assigned a number to each scene in terms of whether it was sort of hard to read, positive, negative, just how I felt. And chapter 1, you can see, ended on an up note. Chapter 2 was awfully depressing, ended on a very mild up note. And then almost all the chapters after that ended on a down note. Fear, death, a little bit of an up note on chapter 6, disappearance, death, disappearance, dies. And it explained to me my feeling of doom. And so I gave it to the writer and said, consider, not shoehorning in some positivity, but just actually rethinking how you want the reader to feel. Because if I felt this way, guaranteed other readers will also feel this way. So that's the kind of fun you can have with book maps. Nothing earth-shattering, but just I personally find them very interesting. Okay, back to round this baby up. Oh, how are we doing for time? 5:25. Be a miracle if we might end on time today. We might not. Okay, destination wedding. And don't ever feel you have to stick around. If you gotta go, that's fine. You can watch the last 5 minutes on the recording. Here's my thinking, because this is a course, and those 16 bullet points that I read and talked about, my thinking on destination wedding sort of coalesced around these ones, which are, and I do hesitate to impose my own views. I don't want to color your analysis at all. But I might as well, because how else are you going to know what one person thinks? So I still don't, this is not the be all end all on how to think about this novel. I thought character arc was an issue because there really wasn't one. Do we know what Jo and Tom want and why they want it? Goals and motivations. We know what Jo doesn't want. She doesn't want to go to the wedding. And arc is about transformation. So at the beginning of the novel, Jo is frustrated and negative. She feels stalled out with her writing. She resents Lisa's success. At the end, she's got an agent. I'm pretty sure she has a publishing deal, but nothing else has changed that I'm aware of, actually, except that Tom shows up in her driveway. They haven't spoken. She's not. The things that did change were external. They weren't internal, as far as I could tell. A publishing deal doesn't make you a different person. You're just the same person with a book deal. So I think all of the characters could be looked at in terms of arc, but Jo I would look at first, especially if you're leaning towards this is women's fiction. Tom, if you're going to keep him, if you think this is a romance, not that it's your decision, but thinking we're doing a thought experiment here. I would suggest Tom's arc is important. Do their obstacles force them to see their own flaws? They didn't seem related. Their obstacles and the characters' flaws, I didn't get the sense that they were necessarily related to each other. Do they change? I don't feel that they changed enough to make it a novel. And Lisa, she was too one-dimensional, really. She was a definite nightmare. But what's her role, really? She can't just be the bad guy without any nuance to make it a realistic romance. There's reasons why Tom was with her at one point and why she and Jo were friends. So I felt that those things could be explored a little more. Would I do an entire column in the book map on that? I don't know, but I would think about it. I might. This next bullet point, emotional impact. What is the emotional impact of the story? I wouldn't do a column on the book map in that necessarily, because there's not enough meat in that. But it was something that struck me, was that I did not feel emotionally invested. Plot. I felt actually the plot kind of worked. Does it follow a cause and effect chain? Yes. I'm not clear on why people are doing what they're doing, but the progression of getting to the wedding makes sense. Are there issues of logic and credibility? Absolutely. There is a gap where she doesn't try to contact Lisa and so on. Do subplots contribute to the main plot? that's one of the questions of the slide for analysis. You know, what are the subplots? Well, one of them was Tom's sister's death and how it impacted him. Is it a subplot? Not really. But you know, it's like a B story almost, or it's something. It could become something if it's a romance and his character were developed more. I think the big one for plot for me was, what's the climax? I'll just leave that one hanging. Is it the wedding? I don't know. Okay, and then the other thing that struck me was genre. It doesn't work as a romance for me because they're so dysfunctional. I would be afraid of them spending their lives together. So, not to be overly critical, but I didn't feel that it was romantic. And it doesn't really accord with genre expectations. The meet cute is a little strange. There's serial killer vibes there. So unless it's an enemies to lovers thing, I don't know enough about romance to really break down why it doesn't hit the genre marks for me, but I would sure as heck figure it out if I was writing an editorial letter on this. If not, what genre does it seem to fit? I would say it could fit women's fiction if there was a transformation and some kind of discovery and decision and agency from Jo. Jo didn't have a lot of agency or the ability to act on her own behalf. And then, or if you're thinking, yeah, this is a decent romance, it's got the bones for it, what would have to change? Maybe alignment of both points of view, like so that they're more equally weighted, more understanding of Tom, that kind of stuff. So these are the things that would floating around in my mind. And then I would probably pick one to do a column. And in my case, it would probably be character development, character arc, just because to me, that's the most important thing that needs work. And everything else I could talk about in the editorial letter. Okay. When you deliver it, this slide shows two frogs meditating. I would say, don't forget to tell the writer what it's for. So I put a note in the editorial letter saying, you know, the book map breaks it down scene by scene. And then sometimes I suggest how they can use the book map on their own when they get into revision, because you don't actually change anything for them. They change everything themselves. It's not like a line edit where you move stuff around and write new words. They do all the moving. It's very rare that I will move stuff around. It's usually nonfiction for a one-off writer, like a life story. Anyway, so I tell the writer what it's for, and then sometimes I suggest when we're talking, we can screen share and go through it a little bit if they're curious. Some writers have really run with the book map and they will use it for their own ends, and they'll make one for every book they write after that. It can be very encouraging to see how much some writers love them. All right, key takeaways. This is a slide showing a key. And there will be 5 bullet points, I believe. Book maps can give you a bird's eye view of the manuscript. They attempt to dissect a piece of art, so there will be judgment calls and fluidity. They're a living document that helps you analyze the novel, so you're not done the book map until you've finished writing the editorial letter and you've decided what goes in the book map and what goes in the editorial letter and what can stay in the comments, and just kind of getting a sense of what to give them that gives them a full picture of what you feel and think and suggest, but without being too repetitive or being too repetitive. You won't know what book maps reveal until you do them. When you deliver it, say how to use it. So I will sometimes suggest that they pin it to their wall, that white stuff that I think it's called blue tack, that you can warm up and stick stuff to your wall. They can do that with their book map, and then they can walk around, and if their cause and effect chain needs work, they can actually start seeing their stuff in a different way if they have that kind of wall space. So the idea is to frame the book map for the writer so they can feel that it's useful. I've only had one writer in the last 10 years. Well, actually, I've only been doing book maps for about 6 years, but I've only had one writer say I didn't get anything extra out of the book map. And that's, that was fair enough. There wasn't anything extra in the book map because she didn't have any real structural issues. There was nothing I could really do with the book map that was going to, earn its place, but I had already done it. So I had to do it to know that it wasn't actually going to be that helpful for that novel. But that's the only time that's ever happened. Assignments? None. Well, I would encourage you to do a book map, but I'm not going to take them. I will take them and pass them to the writer, but I'm not going to give you feedback on them because they're impossible to do wrong. How you do them is however you think they'll work for the writer. So, oops. So I would really encourage you to do a book map. If you don't want to do one on Destination Wedding because you don't want to read it again, I would suggest, well, I would still suggest doing it actually because it's short and you'll get a taste of it and you'll have an example of it. But you can also do it if you're working on somebody else's stuff. I've had students in this course do book maps for other manuscripts and just report on the week 6 on their sit rep. Wow, man, I love book maps. Read it over, write on it, use the questions for analysis to gather any new insights. If you haven't finished reading the Sarah Cipher book, the little editor's lexicon, I would just finish off that. It's got some really good terminology you can use for your editorial letter next week. And if you have time, you have options. Write a reading commentary, which was in week 3's packet. It's 1,200 words on one aspect of craft in any novel you feel like writing on. You can send it to me. I might skim read it, but I won't give you feedback. I might actually read it just out of sheer interest, but I won't give you feedback. Read a book from the recommended reading list in week 1, or just post your stuff on Slack. There was business homework last week, websites and stuff. Or you can even post your book map on Slack if you felt like it. Week 5 is integrating and conveying your findings. So we'll do one more look at craft elements, the biggest ones. The editorial letter, what it does, like why I think they're important, and then how to write a strong one. And that is it. Any final questions, comments, concerns, quibbles, conundrums? Okay, we're all pretty, it's winter. I don't know about you guys. Well, actually, Kate, spring for you, right? It's getting hard to stay alert here, so I'll let you all go. It'll take me longer to send the stuff out because I had to stop the first video and blah blah, so I'll have to do some editing, but you'll all get it by tomorrow at some point. Good luck. Goodbye.